All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar with ECDA. I I am David Chapragi. Um, some of you might be wondering what happened to Paulina, who was supposed to be the host of this webinar. Well, unfortunately, she got unwell, so I have jumped into to become the host for you today. I am, as I mentioned, David. I work at ECD as a senior digital campaign advisor. And I'm just going to wait a couple of more seconds to start the introductions and then hand over the mic to our presenters today from Electica. I can see the room is filling in quite nicely. So why don't we just go ahead and jump into what are we going to talk about today. So welcome everyone. Again, my name is David, and this is a webinar by ECDA. Great digital campaign can still exist in 2026. Before I jump into, or before our presenters jump into the topic for today, I do want to introduce ECDA to people who are engaging with us the first time. ECDA is an NGO, the European Centre for Digital Action. We are a group of people who are dedicated to strengthen the skills, especially in digital campaigning for progressives across Europe. We do that by providing resources, webinars like this, trainings, and one-on-one expert advice and mentoring and coaching for people, individuals, and organizations across the continent. We work with NGOs, political parties, trade unions, media organizations, and try to find the best tools and the best campaign tactics that work for them for progressive growth. We are very proud of our digital organizers toolbox that is on the ECDA website. That's the Center for Digital Action.eu. In this toolbox that you have to register for, you will find amazing resources about different aspects of digital campaigning, such as social media advice, what are some platform-specific tactics and content ideas that work to mobilize and reach people across social media channels. And you will find trainings and resources around WhatsApp, webinars like this that we are going to have today. So I would definitely advise you to scan this QR code, find the link in the comments that you are going to see in a sec. Take a look at all the resources in the toolbox, register, and also while you are there, subscribe to our newsletter as well. We are sending you regular updates about what is working in digital. And we are also sharing very great story that might give you some optimism going forward. So with all that, this was ECDA, and today's topic is basically a recap of the last 2 months. I think some of you who are working in social media and have been doing a lot of advertising on social media are have been experiencing some challenges since the beginning of October, since the TTPA, the European legislation, had the effect that big corporations like Facebook and Google and Meta and Google basically stopped political advertisement across all their platforms in the European Union. We wanted to provide some recap. This is a looking back at this last 2 months, and we have two very great people with us from Electica that will help us understand what is actually TTPA, what can we understand how it works, what are some effects that it had on the social media activities that progressive organizations are experiencing. And these two people are Jose Paz Ferreira and Tyler Michaels. I will let them introduce themselves, and then we are going to dive deep into the conversation. So, Jose, Tyler, the mic is yours.
Thank you, David. Nice to see everybody here. I see some familiar faces in the chat. So nice to see those folks that I know, and nice to meet the rest of you. Thanks for being here in the morning or afternoon or whatever time it is where you are. So I think basically there's a few things that we want to talk about, and David has some very thoughtfully prepared questions. At the start, it's worth just laying out a little bit about where we come to this from. Electica is the company that both of us work for, and Electica has specialized in digital advertising and specifically programmatic advertising for a really long time. So pre-TTPA, we were running campaigns, meta campaigns and programmatic campaigns and other digital advertising campaigns across Europe. And we do a bunch of work in the US. I see Aaron on the call. Nice to see you. In the UK, I see Holly on the call, and I see our colleagues were very supportive in showing up and saying hello this morning. Um, but in Europe, we're doing a little bit of everything. And like as with everyone, we're doing Google ads and Meta ads and open network programmatic and all the other DSPs and a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And post TTPA, that has changed a little bit. But even this year, we've run at least two pan-European campaigns in the post-TTPA era, and we're previously running work in Romania for the presidential elections, for instance, or in Germany this year at the beginning of the year in some of the major elections there. So we come to this with a little bit of a sort of focus, which is obviously on advertising as opposed to the broad swath of all of the digital tools that are available. So I wanted to just call that out. This today is mostly going to be about ads because TTPA is mostly about ads. Although we'll talk a little bit about the things that you can do to kind of cover for the TTPA's impact on non-advertising formats. And then personal background, I come from Canada. I live in Toronto, he, him pronouns, and my background is with the Social Democratic Party here in Canada. Jose, you want to do a quick intro?
Glad to do it. Thank you, Tyler. Such a good presentation that was immediately hard for me to follow up. But yeah, my background is pretty much doing campaigning in Portugal, where I'm from and where I still live, mainly for the Socialist Party. And I've joined Electric a couple of years ago, which allowed me to work on many of the campaigns that Tyler just mentioned. And now that we have the introductions, David, I think we can pivot back to you for the questions.
Incredible. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for your introductions. I think we should just get started with the very basics. You have mentioned TTPA. What is actually TTPA? Can you tell us a bit like what the regulation actually means? And we also mentioned political advertising, but can you give us what actually political advertising means in practice? What is political and what is not political? And before you jump right into the very dry legal things, I just do want to mention to all the audience that we have the Q&A open. We are planning to stop the presentation around 45 and leave space for questions and answers. But I do want to encourage everyone to send in their questions because I'm also looking at that board. And if there is something that can be just looped into the conversation, I will try to do that. So yeah, don't keep your questions to the end of the session. But yeah, what is TTPA? Can you enlighten us a little bit?
Yeah, thank you so much, David. So, as Tyler and David, I'm not sure which one of you just mentioned it. There's one first thing that we need to take into consideration as I go into a bunch of legalese slides. Unfortunately, to my parents' sadness, I am not a lawyer, so nothing that I'm about to say counts as proper legal advice. Unfortunately, again, especially since TTPA has allowed me to deal with a lot of lawyers and understand that they get paid considerably better than digital ads professionals. So I myself am reconsidering, but for now, take this as a civilian discussing legal topics. And also bear in mind, these next few slides are going to have a lot of text. I'm sorry, I know it's not ideal, but I know that they will be available in the toolbox, as David just mentioned later on. So you can feel free to then use those to use some of the information that is within them. In here, I will kind of browse through, but if there's any specific questions on anything specific within these slides, unless it is very a legal debate to which I will hardly be able to help, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will try our best to answer those as well. So what is the TTPA? And apologies to those who have already I'm sure there's all types of people within the audience. Some have just found out that Meta no longer allows ads in Europe. Others, I'm sure, have been following the regulation for a while, such as ourselves. And so pretty much the TTPA is a regulation created by the European Union, approved at the European Parliament, and then that took effect on October 10, 2025. It stands for Transparency and Targeting of Political Advertising. Its goals, I think everyone on this call will very likely agree, that are very noble and quite useful. So it was motivated by concerns over manipulation, foreign interference, misuse of personal data. This is anything from Russian interference to the Cambridge Analytica case from 10 years ago. It is a regulation that clearly has been in the works for a little while, and it has, as the name kind of indicates, two components: transparency and targeting, obviously. So from a transparency perspective, what this actually means is that any ad will need to be clearly labeled as such, so political ads specifically. And I'll then get to the second half of your question, David, about what is a political ad. Very good question as well. So all ads need to be labeled transparently and need to disclose information like its sponsor, its funding, its targeting criteria, and a few more things. We'll see it in a little more detail in a second. This is the transparency part of the TTPA, and then there is the targeting part of the TTPA. So the TTPA limits targeting based on personal data. It can only be used if a person explicitly consents to its use for political ads. And even then, sensitive data, the categories of sensitive data as defined by the GDPR are obviously off limits as well. So the goal here is that users, citizens only receive political ads if they're being targeted, that is, if they've explicitly said, I accept to be targeted for political ad purposes. From a theoretical perspective, I would say this makes a lot of sense, but the implementation of this is quite complicated, as you can all understand. And the process of finalizing and implementing this legislation was quite messy. The final guidelines from the Commission came in on October 8th. As you can see from the first bullet point, the legislation took effect on October 10th, which is not ideal for anyone in the market, obviously. And so from that perspective, despite its noble objectives, the TTPA brought in a few challenges and a few complications for campaigners, which I'm guessing is what brings you in today to this webinar as well. So there's a fundamental question here, because obviously the TTPA only applies to political advertising, and there's been a decent amount of confusion about what exactly is political advertising, what exactly is taken into consideration by the TTPA. So political advertising is, according to the TTPA, a message that is either by, for, or on behalf of a political party. So if you're a political party or political actor, so if you're a political a party, a candidate, an office holder, a foundation that is affiliated to a political party is a more edge case, but probably also falls under this. Immediately, any ad campaign that you try to run will be subject to the TTPA regulation. However, it is not just if you're a political actor. If your ad is liable and designed to influence the outcome of an election, a referendum, a voting behavior, a legislative or regulatory process, that is also a political ad. So say if your ad is campaigning specifically, it's a petition, you're running an ad for a petition that is trying to pressure the government to abolish fireworks. That would be a political ad. So the thing that we saw, however, from this perspective is that, unfortunately, this definition can be so broad and so one case fits all that in specific instances, what we've seen thus far is that a lot of publishers, and of course, David already mentioned Meta and Google themselves, but even besides that, a lot of publishers tend to apply this very conservatively and to just say, is this even remotely close to politics? We just don't really want to touch it, which has created a gap in all campaigners' toolbox. This slide here, I will kind of just browse over, but I think it's quite useful for everyone to have, because as we will see a little bit in a second, pretty much one of the things that you can do across the TTPA is if your organization is not specifically a political actor, there is still space to run ads following the previous conventions, as long as these ads are not classified as political advertising. And what I have here is a table that has been provided by the European Commission. It is publicly available online, but it will be on the slides, that pretty much says what you have to consider when you're identifying a political ad. The content of the message, the sponsor of the message, the language of the message, its context, its means, and its target audience. So pretty much what the regulation ultimately tells us is that political advertising is also contextual. It will take a holistic approach to classifying what is political advertising and what isn't. So often it won't be sufficient to just say, well, actually, we don't mention any politicians, so this is not political advertising. It goes beyond that. And very often, despite these limits, quite often the TTPA tends to be broad in treating topics as political. So pretty much that is the TTPA, and that is what is considered political advertising under the TTPA. I hope this was clear enough, but David, please correct me if not.
No, that was very enlightening. Thank you so much. And I mean, I'm sure people like me had to use the last 2 months just to understand what TTPA actually is legally. But I'm sure there are organizations, political actors, civil society organizations who have been doing a lot of experiments in this new era of non-political advertisement on social media and on the internet. And based on those experiences, can you give us a couple of immediate consequences of what the TTPA have caused in advertising for civil society organizations, and just to give us a sense of what actually happened in practice in the last 2 months in advertising?
Yeah, great question. So if you will allow me, just because I'm not sure how familiar the audience is again, I will take it even a little bit further back, which is to the point in which Meta and Google say they're exiting the market. So ultimately, there's this general idea that the TTPA, there's conversations that you will often hear, there's a ban. There is no ban. There was a choice by those large platforms to leave the European political advertising market, which obviously created a very big gap in most political campaigners' toolbox. As Tyler just mentioned, we've mostly focused on programmatic advertising, but as people who also did a good amount of meta buying on behalf of their clients, it also created a gap in our strategies, evidently. That is kind of the first consequence. Was these platforms looked at the legislation, they said the risk here is a 6% fine on our global revenue. We don't want to take that risk. We are leaving this market that ultimately represents a moderately small source of revenue for us, despite being the lifeline for many civil society organizations, as we all know here. That is the first consequence. It creates a big issue for people like us who are trying to figure out how to run these campaigns. The second consequence, to an extent that we've been seeing thus far, is that contrarily to what was expected, the TTPA thus far has actually brought in less transparency, more so than more transparency. Why so? Before the TTPA, we had public ad libraries, including Google and Meta's. You could know which ad reached how many people, when, what targeting criteria were selected. Currently, what you see is that tool is simply no longer available, right? There are no more public ad libraries. There's a fragmented ecosystem in which a few ad libraries pop up here and there, but there is no way to say, well, these are the ads that are being ran by party X or party Y or NGO X or NGO Y, which obviously for now is an issue. I'll here put in a little flag to myself, which is to say that the Commission has planned to launch a centralized repository, which will come into force before May of next year. We will see by then whether who will comply and how exactly. And when that happens, this gap should disappear. But for now, that gap exists and is relevant, and that we should be noticing it. So within that, given that the situation, what we've been seeing is a big focus on organic social media content. But again, on organic social media, pro-European progressive parties do not tend to be benefited quite often, as we all know, unfortunately. Algorithms live in complete opacity. We don't have any way to actually check what's going on within these algorithms. There's no regulation that aims at algorithmic transparency at the European level whatsoever. And we continue to see social media platforms in which viral content gets the most traction without any sort of checks and balances on why this is happening specifically. And we see that there's a lot of people that are willing to break the rules. There's ultimately one of the issues of the TTPA. It is, I don't think Russian state-sponsored actors are about to come into Europe and write a little disclaimer saying this was paid for by the FSB. So unfortunately, as long as that is the case, what we will see is rogue foreign actors, and I'm not making here any accusations to any rogue foreign actors, but even within national elections that we've seen in this past couple of months, ads have been run. In some instances, I'm sure it was just due to ignorance, let's put it between brackets, of not knowing about the new regulations and being allowed to do so. In other cases, it's obviously campaigns that aim at running political ads without being constricted by these rules. So ultimately, we're creating a two-speed arrangement in which the campaigners and organizations who are trying to follow the rules and are actually abiding by the rules have a lesser toolbox than those organizations. But hopefully by the end of this webinar, all organizations will have a sense of what can be done from a compliant perspective moving forward. And one of those things that will be entailed by that is honestly to get legal counsel. I know I seem obsessed with the general concept of lawyers, but ultimately this is important regulation with very heavy consequences potentially for any organization running this type of operation. So it is important to check with legal counsel of some sort, even if it's just the basics of, would this campaign constitute political advertising, yes or not? Do we have to update our data privacy policies within our websites because we want to be able to use the first party data that we are collecting to reach out to people, etc.? All of these questions are questions to which, unfortunately, most digital ads professionals won't be able to help you, but legal counsel specialized in this matter should. So thus far, these are just some of the little unexpected consequences of the TPA that I don't think the commission had in mind when actually putting out the guidelines, that we've been seeing thus far more from a general perspective on the ecosystem.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with everyone. You have already mentioned organic content has become more important since there is no possibilities for pushing content with advertisement. I'm wondering, do you have any other strategies that organizations should prepare with uh, going forward in 2026?
Okay, so I will just start by opening up this conversation because I do think that is a great question, David, that will need a little bit more information than just this. But so pretty much, I just mentioned legal counsel. The first general bullet points is keep in mind your organic strategy, diversify your channels, including your influencer outreach strategies. It is quite funny. Tyler and I just went to Brussels, and before you would say the word influencer in Brussels, and they would look at you as if you were crazy. And now people are like, "What? Who are the influencers?" So exciting to see that people are already diversifying a little bit from that perspective, and also owning your first party data. There's a final point that is connected to what I just mentioned. That is ultimately, it's also probably time to check, is there a way for me to run my ads without them being considered political? I know Meta has a pretty broad policy about this that goes beyond even the boundaries of the TTPA. But in case you have the possibility of framing your ads in a way that does not fall under the definition we just discussed, that would probably be my first advice. For as long as you can avoid the TTPA, try to avoid it. If there's no way to do so, I think Tyler here is going to give us a general sense of what the state of the art is at the moment, kind of what we've seen since the TTPA came into force, etc. Correct, Tyler?
Yeah, and if I could just add one thing really quickly first, because I do think that depending on where you are, like as David mentioned, some people are in this every day, and you already know, oh, we've been trying to run these type of ads and they've been rejected. We've been trying to run these type of ads and they've been getting through on Google. I think the first thing, if you don't run ads very regularly, one other thing that I'll add to Jose's point is the most immediate thing you should prepare for is that the next time you try to run ads on Meta or on Google, they will not be approved. So if you have like a quarterly fundraising campaign that you usually run, or a quarterly petition signature campaign that you usually run, you should look at your strategy for next year and no longer assume that you will be able to run those at all, full stop. And all of the strategies that we're talking about are sort of like secondary to that point. Number one, just don't expect that you'll be able to definitely spend money anymore without making a few changes that could influence that. Obviously, this is very, very difficult for organizations that rely on list building and fundraising, relied on Meta for list building and fundraising. So I think just mentally prepare for this new reality. I think, David, did you have
Amazing.
another?
Yeah,
Any,
amazing. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask if you can go into more deeply what the landscape is. Like what was it before and what are you seeing now after the ad ban?
yeah. Cool. Okay. So most of the money that got spent on digital used to be spent on Meta and Google. It was not anyone's favorite thing to send the Silicon Valley billionaires and the, Zuckerberg Chan Foundation all of their money. But it was the reality that those were the places that people spent the most time on the internet. If you look at like top time spent, the spend totals matched the amount of time spent, and that's probably how it should be. YouTube was massive within this, even separate to the Google ecosystem of advertising. And I think that for obviously list building, Meta was the cheapest source of leads for most organizations most of the time. And so, especially for NGOs, nonprofits, and so on, like if you were doing list building somewhere, it was almost definitely Meta. As noted, those are pretty much closed now. Meta, in particular, we've heard that they continue to keep their mixture of causes and social issues and political all together. And so people are having a really hard time getting their ads run on Meta. We've had a couple organizations come to us and say, hey, I ran this ad. It's not about politics, but it is about a social cause, and Meta disapproved it. I'm going through the process of trying to appeal that disapproval because I think that that's against the rules. And the thing that I've had to tell people rather sadly is stop appealing. The more that you appeal, the more likely it is to get looked at by a real human. And the more real humans look at it, the more they will realize that it's actually totally against their policy, and they may shut down your entire account. It's not an accident that ads are getting disapproved. That is the intentional consequence of the policy. And the harder you fight them on it, the more likely they are to say, actually, it just seems like you're trying to break the rules consistently here. We're going to shut you down full stop. So be very cautious. I have at least one person who recently got their entire ads account shut down because they appealed, and on appeal, they decided, no. Google has been a bit more of a mixed bag. We've heard things from folks where some NGOs, nonprofits, and non-political organizations have been able to get their ads live on Google Ads or Google Search or YouTube ads through Google Ads. Um, they apparently have some kind of system where they're categorizing certain issues and types of ads and whatever are not deemed so political, others are. Interestingly, we've actually seen the tech giants themselves running what I would have described as lobbying advertising in Brussels directly on digital out-of-home stuff. But they've phrased it in such a way that it seems like it's not exactly about legislation. It's more of a general appeal to, wouldn't it be nice if the internet was more open or whatever? So clearly, they are aware of the fact that there is some wiggle room here, and if you're able to create a world where your ads are not political, you can continue to use maybe Google, probably not Meta. But if you're trying to talk about plastics bans, that's regulation legislation. Like if you're trying to talk about, I don't know, climate change, that's clearly an issue that is associated with a political party. If you're trying to talk about any number of issues, there's just no chance. Like you can't do it as non-political. So the thing that I wanted to sort of say a little bit is the one option that is remaining is open network programmatic advertising. We find ourselves in a weird position because it's what we've been talking about for years, talking about the benefits. It's now, for many people, the only game in town. Pre-TTPA, we were able to run sort of all kinds of programmatic everywhere on the internet. If you wanted to run your ads on a specific website, we could do it. You could do connected TV and YouTube, and in addition to YouTube and social, you could do audio. Post TTPA, we're finding that this is a little bit more limited. Connected TV is slow to come back online. Audio, we're not 100% sure what kind of reach we're going to get. It seems to be possible, but limited. Obviously, YouTube and social are totally out, but display and video are very much possible. We're seeing very good reach and scale with open network programmatic display and video. David, is it worth it? Do you feel like it's worth it
Um,
from a little bit more
I
about?
actually, yeah, I actually, before you move more into the programmatic ads, which I'm very curious about to understand like how it works, what it actually is, and what does it mean in practice. I do want to bring up this question Nicholas has posted in the Q&A, because in the last couple of weeks, the conversations about political ads passing or not passing has been very much about specific words or specific images. And I'm curious what you think, because what you are saying is that it's a bit contradictory to this. So it's not that there is like these niches that are going to pass or not, but it's a more holistic policy, feels like a more holistic policy that is just not executed excellently at this point. So but like, is there any more knowledge, like what are the words or what are the concepts that are passing, or show consistency in passing or not passing? And can you share a bit more info about who gets blocked and why?
Yeah, great question. The short version is that, go figure, as usual, the tech platforms are not particularly transparent so far. Um, from what we've seen, both Meta and Google run a first phase algorithmically based filter. So it is a near certainty that the filters that they are using are some version of each of their proprietary large language models, or a similar algorithm that is like doing what I would describe as like as close to human as they can figure it out, AI agents doing a first pass on the ads. My guess is that there are certain keywords, especially in English, but increasingly in other languages, that will just, if you have a politician's name and it's a known politician, you're not going to get the ads live. Like if you try to run an ad that is about Trump, my guess is that that will very quickly flag the algorithm saying, no, this is politics. Other things we really don't know yet. We have not had enough time and data. It's been 2 months, and not that many people have been trying to test the boundaries. Partially because there is penalties for publishers, but there's also penalties for individual political actors. Some of the clarification of regulation seems to indicate that if you run an ad and they think that it is part of the TTPA, you also could face some consequence in addition to the publisher. Um, and so my impression is that they're being quite cautious. Like, I don't know if anyone has gotten an ad through that used the words climate change. I'd be very curious if someone in the comments can say, yes, we were able to do it. That's very interesting data, and I would love to hear it. But I think even things like that are likely to be flagged, at least in the immediate future. As I noted, Google has the only thing that we have heard through back channels is that Google is making a list of topics that they're definite no's and a list of topics that are like sort of more maybe yeses, but they haven't publicly released this. It's not publicly available. They will not be telling us as they update it. So it is really going to be a process of experimentation for people. And those organizations who have a little bit of higher risk tolerance, I would encourage you to start trying. Like, even if you don't plan to actually run the advertising, put a €5 budget behind 20 different versions of ads, each with different versions of the same keywords, and just see which ones go through and which ones don't. After, of course, consulting lawyers and getting your own legal advice, caveat necessary. But yeah,
Great.
David, the answer,
Yeah, yeah.
unfortunately, is we don't have a ton of information yet.
That's clearly unclear. Once you have your hands on this list by Google, you can have a follow-up webinar at ACA.
If
So,
we,
okay,
I promise to pass it along as wide and as far as we can.
amazing, amazing. But yeah, programmatic advertising. You have been mentioning that during the webinar, and it seems like there is some very considerable room in programmatic advertisement still under TTPA. And I want you to talk a bit about that and also what your work has been in programmatic advertising in the last couple of years.
Cool. Yeah, I think that as I sort of said a little bit, like programmatic advertising is one of those, technically any ad, including Google and Meta, is programmatic. Any ad that is targeting people based on who they are, where they are, what browser they're using, what sites they're visiting, digital ads that are served by a program and not like you chose to serve that ad at that time, technically it's programmatic. So first thing to say that when we're talking about programmatic here, mostly what we're talking about is open network programmatic, which means aside from the massive social media networks like Meta and TikTok and even LinkedIn and Google, where their entire advertising ecosystem is vertically integrated, like they're the publisher and they're the ads platform and they let you log in and run them. Open network programmatic is combining millions and millions and millions of different sources of inventory into an ad network. And then as a publisher or an advertiser, or sorry, as an advertiser, you can go in via a series of tools that I don't need to explain too much to go in and try to get advertising on all these millions and millions of websites, connected TV devices, podcast and streaming audio, like all of these places. So if you want to say it in a single sentence, open network programmatic is everywhere on the internet that is not a social media site. So the way that it works is very similar for people who've worked on Google Ads. We have our own platform that we are working to get active again for post-TTPA landscape, but it's, relatively similar. Pre-TTPA, there was tons of platforms that you could use. You go on and you set your settings. I want to target in this country. I want to target people of these ages. I want to target people who are interested in, green, whatever, something. And then the ads would go out. And anytime someone logs on, like if you open your phone right now and go to the Guardian's website, in the zero point 0.1 milliseconds that it takes for the website to load, the website takes information about you saying, here's a device, it has this IP address, it's got this device ID and whatever. It sends that information to the ad network. The ad network says, hey, we've got an ad that's about to load somewhere in, this place with this type of person. Who wants it? And then millions of, or at least tens of thousands of advertisers compete to get that advertising space. The benefit of programmatic historically has been it can be cheaper, especially for broad reach campaigns, than social media has been. Depends on the use case. But more significantly, the reach is just higher. Most people who use Facebook or Meta or Instagram or Google will also browse another website at some point in the standard week. And so you can reach a large number of users that are all over the internet, but not everyone who uses other platforms, other apps, other whatever will use Meta every week. So it's just there's 20 to 40% of internet users historically who aren't on the social platforms and don't spend time there often that you could also reach via programmatic ads when you expand to everything. Um, so that's the general scope. David, is that clear enough? Is there anything that needs clarification about?
No, I think that's clear. Um,
Good. You're
so
my
if you, yeah,
audience for making sure that I'm not going too fast or too slow.
no, I
Um,
was just thinking about my like personal experiences, and I think the Guardian example is a very good one. And I think I can connect how that actually is going to find me, how that ad is actually going to find me. We do have a question about how programmatic has changed since the TTPA, but maybe you can reflect on that a bit later.
it's kind of partially the slide that I skipped over quickly to give the programmatic inventory background, which is it's limited. I don't know if people how closely they follow various things, but Denmark, for instance, the Publishers Consortium in Denmark, very quickly after the TTPA draft implementation guidance was issued and Meta pulled out, they came out and said, we actually think we're reading this very carefully, and we think that any Danish publisher should not take any political ads, period, because even serving an ad might be in contravention of some of the TTPA regulations. So very quickly, you had publishers in Denmark going, no, okay, we want out. We don't want any political ads on our website. We're pulling out of the ad networks and SSPs and publisher bundlers that we've been using. And so it was an example where you saw on the publisher side, the actual websites themselves, the newspapers, the apps, the whatever, where you were getting the advertising inventory, they were starting to pull their websites out of the networks that you could advertise on like this. Now, in Denmark specifically, they've come back and said, actually, maybe we were a little too hasty. We actually think that you can run advertising as long as you do it based on the right rules. And that is a pattern that we've basically seen repeated everywhere. Initially, when we were doing outreach to put our supply of advertising together for our own purposes, we reached out to hundreds of SSPs, publishers, suppliers, ad networks, individual organizations. And in the outreach to hundreds, very many came back immediately and said, no, we just don't want a part of this. So that shrinks the bundle of potential websites and apps and whatever where you can advertise. With that said, as time has gone on and people are getting more comfortable, I think we're seeing more and more people opt back in. And certainly, even in the campaigns that we've launched in the last little while, the first post TTP campaigns we ran on October 12th, I think, they had a really hard time scaling. It was seeing a lot of app inventory only. In fact, exclusively app inventory. There was no websites taking inventory. And over time, we've seen that change a bit. We've seen like web applications start to take more and more ads. We've even seen some sort of streaming television style applications start to accept advertising before the pre-roll stuff. Even things like big names, website inventory like ESPN and Fox Entertainment and Fox News and all of these places that are slowly starting to opt back in, and we're seeing more and more reach. But the fundamental answer to the question of like, how has inventory changed since it came into force? There's much less inventory, and it is harder to access. A bunch of the consumer DSPs that previously were available are just off the market and don't even run anymore. And so it's a slowly evolving ecosystem with more barriers to entry than there used to be.
Got it. Thanks. And I'm very curious about your approach, specifically in programmatic, and how do you keep compliant, beside having an obsession with lawyers, under the TTPA environment?
Yeah, it's a good question. Basically, there's no secret magic here. We have just been willing to do the work. As far as we know, we were just in Brussels and we spoke to people who work with the commission. And like, as far as we know, we have not heard of other people who have tried to do this in exactly the same way yet on the progressive side. We have no idea what's happening with conservatives. We assume that there's someone over there doing it, but at least on the progressive side. But over the next while, we fully expect that there will be other agencies like ours, other organizations who focus on politics. So this is the bread and butter, and who really care about ensuring continued access to progressive parties to be able to parties and organizations to get the word out to voters in the EU. So first, I just want to say we might be one of the first who've done this, but we fully expect that this will roll out and more will do it over time. It's not rocket surgery, as I sometimes joke. Like it's straightforward. The first is you have to make sure that every ad that goes out has that disclaimer. There's multiple ways you can do it. Our approach is mostly to have an automated disclaimer that just shows up along the ad. The second thing is you have to have a transparency notice. We've done that in the form of an ads library. So if you launch an ad and there's a disclaimer notice, someone clicks on the notice, it takes them to a library. The library has information about, here's what this ad was. And then we then have to send the library data off to the EU Commission, which we have to store for 7 years and send them in a specific format. And that will have information about, who was the sponsor and how much money they spent and so on. And on the targeting side, we've kind of gone a little bit cautious here also to start. And I think others will too, which is we just don't allow targeting based on personal data at all. So no age targeting, no gender targeting. Even for folks who might say that they have an opted-in first-party list right now, we're just not going to touch it initially. And so what we can do is, I've said to other folks, it's more like being back in the 90s with digital, maybe, which is to say you can target based on calling specific websites, or in our case, using the platform to reach out to a list of 100 websites. And you think those websites are very often read by the type of voter that you want to reach. You can do this still. That is allowed. You can target based on contextual and site list targeting. Eventually, once we have more inventory, you can also do slightly more fancy things like saying, I want my ads to show on any website where the website content includes the words climate change. I keep coming back to climate change because it's an easy one. That's something that will be possible as the publisher inventory increases. But for now, those are the main things we allow. So, there's the disclaimer, there's the transparency notice, and then there's the piece around targeting limitations. And finally, there's one that we just have to do for all of the people who come on board, which is onboarding and compliance forms where you certify I am really at this organization. The money really comes from this place. The ads are political. Here's the person who I am. That's been our approach to staying compliant. And I expect that there's probably going to be no cheat codes here. Everyone's going to have to do basically the same thing if they want to run ads that are okay under the TTPA. Jose, I always miss something when I give this explanation. Have I any context that you want to add?
No, I think we're good on compliance for now. I think people want to hear about strategies moving forward, but I'll let David moderate instead of trying to take his role.
No. I mean, you're absolutely right. I was also looking at the time, and I'm sure we can get lost in the details, but I know that you have very specific recommendations for organizations who are preparing for election cycles in 2026. And also for organizations who consider themselves a bit small and are a little bit lost on, okay, what are we actually gonna do with it, with this, in this new environment? So let's dive into it, and maybe we can after get a couple of more questions.
Okay, perfect. Let's start to try. This is a quite a complicated question because I know depending on whether you're a party, an NGO, a large, a small organization, this is quite different. But we're going to try to just give you a few general notes of advice, noting also, as Tyler already did, that ultimately we are not experts in every single one of these things. And thankfully, the ECDA does have experts within all of these sectors and has had webinars about a few of these topics. So probably wise to check in the toolbox and see what is in there for you. So the first thing that we've mentioned is focus on channels that still allow compliant political ads. Some people keep asking us, is Meta coming back? We don't know. Very unlikely. I would put it at best as very unlikely. So it's time to forget about it and start moving forward and looking into new alternatives, into new channels. That could be programmatic, as Tyler mentioned. That could be digital out of home. It could be connected TV direct buys that were, for example, quite a successful strategy in the Netherlands for this last election. It could be influencer marketing, as discussed. It could be audio. I kind of hate audio because it needs to have a spoken disclaimer that needs to be said in a comprehensible manner. So if you have a 30-second ad, probably 15 of it will be this ad was paid for blah, 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 but still something that you should explore regardless of my personal feelings about audio. The second thing, in accordance to what Tyler just mentioned, is start thinking differently about targeting. You can no longer just buy off the shelf, say, I want to reach environmentally conscious citizens. No longer an option. If you want to reach people who are interested in climate change, you will probably have to think outside of the box and think, for example, which websites would these people visit? Can I just do targeting based on contextual, so on the content of the web page, etc.? So as Tyler mentioned, it's a little bit like going back to the 90s. Well, at the 90s, I was mainly in my mother's womb, so I can't really describe how it was back then. But there is a large portion of things there that can still be done from a targeting perspective that are fully compliant. Another suggestion that we have, creative testing. Now you can't, a part of me is actually, at some point in Europe, we started trying to get super cutesy with trying to create these micro targets, super niche, narrow target groups. And let's try to focus on the 18 to 24 voters who previously voted for this specific. Ultimately, I do get why we got to that point from an industry perspective, but it's not clear and there's no scientific evidence saying that that was a better strategy. However, what we know is quite often people are running ads that do not have the desired effect. If you are running an ad campaign in the tens of thousands of euros or hundreds of thousands, you should be testing your creatives before you get it live. It's pointless to spend that amount of money without knowing, does this creative get us closer to our goal? Whether it be recognition, whether it be persuasion, whatever you're thinking about, it's probably worth testing it before. We have a solution for that, but a few other players in the market are in that. And it's something that we definitely recommend focusing on, because now your ads will have to probably be quite broad. So you also want to make sure there's no backlash. Final recommendation is strengthen your own ecosystem. And by this, I mean both from optimizing your landing pages, ensure your email and SMS pipelines are working, ensure your opt-ins are legal, ensure that there's fast load speeds for list building purposes, etc. Which kind of links me to your question, David, on the political party specifically in the electoral cycle. First thing, legal and operational audit now, not in 2026. I don't want, sorry, now I'm bringing back the lawyers for them to work over Christmas, but you don't want to start your campaign without understanding what the regulation is. The second thing is the first party data and its importance. A few organizations have been understanding this for a couple of years, the importance of owning your first party data. Yes, continue to do just that, because currently they're your most valuable asset. Another suggestion is to start thinking about the creatives from a TTPA compliant manner. So you will need to add disclaimers. If you are preparing a campaign in which you'll have to run a lot of creatives, start thinking about what that process will look like internally, so that every single time you don't go back to, oh, we forgot the little disclaimer icon if necessary. So start involving that in your creative development processes. Plan the channel mix, kind of the same thing. So start thinking outside of the box a little bit. Another advantage of the TTPA is that to an extent, it might bring a little bit more creativity to the digital advertising ecosystem in politics, or so I hope, at the very least. And in connection with that, and then I'll shut up and let you actually give the space for questions, David, is to start experimenting as soon as possible. So even if you don't have a massive budget, even if you don't have, it's better to start doing something now. Even if you have 50 euros to try to test on a direct buy for the specific website that you think you maybe could target, it might be worth giving it a shot. Do you want to try a completely different format that you've never tried before? It's probably worth trying to find out, can I access this with my budget level? How can I do it? Who are the providers, etc. And so I'll just wrap it up for smaller organizations before opening up for the Q&A. If the budgets are smaller, and I know a lot of the campaigners here probably feel that way, first solution or suggestion, maximize your organic social strategy. Go back to the drawing board, try to see what has been working, what hasn't been working. Use the tools that you need to amplify your organic content, using your volunteers, using your mailing list, etc. There might be moments in which it will be useful. And finally, the final piece of advice really is going back to what I mentioned in the beginning from a compliance perspective. If possible, try to run your ads as non-political. Obviously, this doesn't apply to political parties. Obviously, it doesn't apply for election campaigns, referendum campaigns, etc. But for NGOs, whenever you see the space to run these campaigns as non-political, you should try to do just that, get legal counsel, check whether that's available for that campaign, and try to run with partners and channels that will allow you to run that campaign regardless. So even if Meta says no, there's still a wider range of things that you will be able to do if your ads are not classified as political. And now I'll shut up and actually answer the questions that we probably have in the Q&A, David.
No, it was excellent. Thank you so much. And these were really like practical advice for organization. I hope so. I just want to say to the audience that this recording is going to be put into our toolbox. So if you want to spend a bit more time checking at the slides and reading through everything, you can do that later. Thank you so much, Jose and Tyler. Yeah, please find their contact information on the slide and check out their website. And we took a couple of questions, so I think we are good on time, but I do have two specific questions that I want to bring in. So if you can get some quick reactions, that would be amazing without going into very details. One is, it was a question about LinkedIn, but I have a more general question about alternative social media, because we have talked a lot about Meta and we have talked a lot about Google, but there's LinkedIn, there's Reddit, there's Discord, other type of social media, or TikTok even, where people might have experimented with advertising. Although I understand most of these platforms did not allow political advertising at all before either, but do you have any fresh experience in the last 2 months with alternative social media ads?
Short answer, no. We have heard from others though, like LinkedIn is a good example where they've just also said no, as far as we know. TikTok never allowed political advertising,
Yep.
so no change there. The other big ones that people have used in the past, that I guess you can call them social, is some of the dating websites, which are mostly owned by Match.com. They have their own, like Grindr and Tinder have their own DSP that you can log in and advertise on. I have not heard about whether they're accepting political advertising on their own platform, but I do know that the Match.com publisher network is still available via programmatic advertising. So maybe there's something there, some platforms. The other ones that people think about as sort of social, like your Twitch kind of universe, or like the new, the Mastodons and the Blue Skies and the whatever, broadly also are not particularly advertising enabled. So I
Yep.
suspect that the answer in short is no, there's not a lot out there. Organic for sure. Everyone should try all the organic things, but for advertising, it's pretty limited. Social is more or less mostly shut.
Got it. Thanks so much. And then another. Oh, Josie, do you want to add something to this question?
Yeah, people often ask us the same question, but nothing, not major to add. But we will hear like, what about Waze? Waze is owned by Google. What about blah blah? It's the ecosystem is not that large. So if it is a political ad, we haven't heard of any alternative social media platform that is accepting those. However, again, if the ad is not strictly political, you're probably worth giving it a try. Will LinkedIn take your ads? Yes, no. Sorry, I know this is not ideal advice, but probably something that you should be testing out as much as possible.
Yeah, let me pick up on that actually, because we had a question about running ads by non-political organizations about politicians. That's a strict no. Tyler, can you elaborate?
It's allowed. It's allowed under the TTPA, but it is a TTPA regulated ad. And I think there was another question about, elevating the profile of a candidate by
Yeah,
having non-party ads about the candidate. The TTP is super clear. If it is about an actor who is a political actor, even if it is about a non-political event, it is TTPA relevant. I mean, you could even think of edge cases where like a politician, it is much more common in America, but politicians regularly resign their position, write a book, and are not in politics for 2 years and then come back and run for president. In those 2 years, is running a book promoting, as Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and all the rest did, like, would that be considered political? The answer under the TTP is almost certainly yes. So there's no way around this. If it's about a politician, if it's about a political party, if it's about an election, it is political. It doesn't mean you can't run it. It just means you have to run it only via compliant advertising.
got it. Jose, any last thought to this topic? Okay, well, let me wrap up this webinar then. I am going to send in a story, though, from Belgium, from Jan, who has been running successful programmatic advertisement. So please check that out. And to wrap the webinar up, I do want to remind folks about the digital organizer toolbox that we have on the ECDA website. Feel free to scan this QR code or find the link in the chat. And I do want to bring your attention to our courses. Although we are going to take some break during the holidays, so the activities are not going to be as frequent as usually. In the new year, in 2026, we are going to come in with full force. We are going to have a 4-week online course to introduce you into the basics of digital organizing. That is going to launch in February, but the application is going to end in the end of January. So make sure that you secure your place already before the end of the year. And we are going to have a TikTok intensive masterclass in February as well. It's going to be a 3-day online training from the very basics to the more advanced parts and elements of running a TikTok program. So if you have been inspired in putting more effort, putting more resources, and putting more energy into building up your organic muscle, then I would definitely advise you not to miss that. We do have a digital progressive magazine, and the 3rd edition is coming up very soon. So I would definitely subscribe to the newsletter to get our newest updates about this. And let's keep in touch. Subscribe to the newsletter, and yeah, we are going to come back very soon. And Tyler, Jose, thank you so much for your presentation today. 2 experts from Electica. Hope we will be able to continue this conversation soon.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thanks for
everybody.
joining.
Bye.